Phyllis Moen is a professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota. She co-directs the Flexible Work and Wellbeing Center, which investigates workplace policy initiatives aimed at promoting individual and family health and life quality, as well as positive business outcomes. Dr. Moen has published numerous books and articles on careers, retirement, health, gender, policy, and families, as they intersect and as they play out over the life course. She is interested in new career retirement paths and previously served as on the board of Civic Ventures, a nonprofit think tank on boomers, work, and social purpose. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Moen to the stage.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And I want to thank Andrew Whistler and Gloria Gutman for making it possible for me to be here today, as well as the Canadian Institute of Health Research Institute on Aging. I especially am pleased to emphasize the research part and how important research is to aging in a changing world. So today what I want to talk about is first the outdated aging time matrix, second what it produces, which is 3 work-family mismatches that reproduce the gendered life course, and then avenues for change. Along the way, I'm going to intersperse what research contributes and tells us about these different issues. But before I begin, I want to talk a little bit about how concepts and categories frame the way we think and limit our ability to really see new innovations. I'm going to talk, and I don't know if you have this in Canada, but in the United States, and especially in the Midwest, and especially in Minnesota, there are these county fairs, county fairs where especially children and young people show their animals or the plants they've grown, etc. I gave this talk in Berlin and they had no idea what I was talking about. So hopefully you do. And I was with my youngest grandson, who was about 3, 2.5 or 3 at the time, who was very tired of watching his older brother wait to show his chickens. So I said, would you like to go out and see some other animals? And we walked around and we saw the cows and we saw the pigs. And I said, what would you like to see next? Do you want to see the goats or the sheep? And he just sort of was looking down at his feet and he says, camel. And I start into this long exegesis about there are domestic animals and there are animals in the wild. We see some in the zoo, but at a county fair, you see pigs and all of those things, and you do not see a camel. And we're just walking, and I'm the professor. I go on and on about all of this, and he doesn't say a word. We turn the corner, and there's a camel. He had been there the night before with his dad. So I just laughed because we think we know everything and we categorize the world as if these are real categories, but they are socially constructed, and given that they're socially constructed, they can be changed. And I want you to think about that around the concepts associated with the time matrix. So what is a time matrix? It has to do with socially expected entrances, durations, and exits. It's mostly about, and in our society, in contemporary society, mostly around the world of work. Everything is around work. But you can also think of other expected durations, like when you go to a dinner party. You can't just get up and leave, you have to stay a while, you have to eat the dessert. There's some norms about how long we stay and how long we don't stay. And as a professor, I know that some students don't know the socially expected duration of when they should leave my office. But there is one. I thought if I maybe had, one of those hourglasses, maybe that would work. But so where does the time matrix come from? Some of it is, of course, from religion. On the seventh day you shall rest. So that gives us Sunday. But most of it comes from railroads. Prior to the advent of railroads, most towns kept their own time. So it could be an hour difference, or 15 minutes difference, or an hour and 25 minutes difference from one town to the next. That doesn't work when you have trains traveling on the same tracks different ways. You want to really make sure that you're all coordinated as to time. The Industrial Revolution required people working together in an assembly line and other ways to get things done, so time mattered. And being there became synonymous with working. So you are at work. That means you're working, and then you have a certain number of hours no matter what you do, no matter if you're on eBay or whatever, you're working, and then you go home and then you're not working. This also comes from collective bargaining, the idea of that time equals money. And so they bargained time, and you got paid by money. And it's built into our habitual routines and practices, that this is the way work is done. There's a lunch hour, there are 2 breaks, or there's a time to be there and a time to leave. And there's a time to work and a time to retire. The time matrix that I hate the most is the one around education. Both at Cornell, where I was for 25 years before I went to University of Minnesota, and at the University of Minnesota, the brochures show 18 to 22-year-olds. That is the student body they're trying to attract. And believe me, those brochures, or what's online about the brochures, really does work. I know a daughter of an economist who was such a rational choice economist. His daughter chose to go to Ohio State because of the hairstyles in that brochure. So one time matrix that's really, it shapes our lives is this lockstep career mystique, I call it. And it's based on the primary workforce, those with, quote, good jobs, and it's based on a male breadwinner model, the idea of full-time, continuous work, often greedy work that's very demanding, total commitment, no outside obligations like any care work for children or seniors. With seniority, you've got job security and benefits. And this is the time matrix that most people, most boomers grew up with and assume that this is the way life is. This is a lockstep life course of first your years of education, then your years of work, and then years of retirement or dying, whichever comes first. The one on the left was 1900, and you can see people didn't have many years of leisure and retirement. That is changing, as is formal education on the other end of the life course. So we're seeing considerable differences. This gendered career mystique is based on 2 dominant cultural templates. One is that there's this male breadwinner, female homemaker template of family life and work life, where seniority and hard work mean security and advancement, but there's someone else doing the family care work. That's what work today is based on. Somebody else doing it, even though there's nobody else doing it now. Then there's the standardized lockstep life course of first education, then continuous full-time employment, then continuous leisure, which has been mostly followed by educated white men in the last century. Now, what women did with the women's revolution, some of you might be as old as I am to remember ads like this ad of the woman washing her clothes in high heels and a dress with the petticoat. I remember those petticoats. But what women did is not change the world of work. They accepted the time matrix that was there, and they replaced the feminine mystique that true happiness and life quality could be found in raising your children and caring for your family, to that the real path to success and life quality is continuous work in a fulfilling occupation. So we even started dressing differently. The dress for success, I don't know how many of you remember that. We used to wear these little bow ties. So what women embraced was not the career mystique only, it was a career mystique plus. They had all this baggage of the housework, the care for the children, the cooking, all this stuff that they also try to do. So I call that the career mystique plus, or else women, if they could afford to, scaled back, part-time, part-year, less of a career focus, off the career track. And this is what I call an aging time matrix. The talk in Halifax, the conference next year in Halifax, the theme is aging structures, from cells to society. And I think we need to think of not only aging people, but aging structures. How this time matrix is old, and it worked for the middle of the last century, but not now. For those of you in the back, there's lots of totally empty tables here that make me feel sad. So if you could come up. So this aging time matrix is at odds with the multi-layered platform of change, a moving platform of change that makes it out of date, but still these policies and practices that set it up are still there. So it is the idea that you work full-time or more hours in a real job, set time and timing, continuous employment, total retirement, and total commitment to work. But also what this provided were boundaries around work and home. You went to work and you went home, and that was non-work time. And I bet everyone in this room doesn't feel that those boundaries exist anymore. You can work all the time, anywhere, everywhere. So what can research contribute to this idea of an aging time matrix? It can describe actual experiences, beliefs, expectations, differences by subgroups, what is. It can identify current mismatches and lags, the inertia in policy and practices that don't keep up with the changing realities. It can suggest adaptive strategies that work, or improvisation, and it can suggest opportunities for change or innovation. So my second area of discussion is about the 3 work-family mismatches that reproduce the gendered life course. One is the work-time mismatch. I believe that the work-family frame, which has occupied a lot of researchers when they talk about the world of work, is too narrow. It's too narrow because it leaves out other contexts: community, culture, economy, biography, and also who gets selected in or who stays in these different contexts. It masks issues around working conditions, retirement conditions, family conditions, health conditions, and the changing nature of the life course. It leaves out too many people. The idea of balance, all of us here, we must balance. I don't like that phrase because balance implies you have to do it yourself and that you're a failure if you're not doing it. Whereas I'd like to say, why don't we change the structures that makes balance possible? Now here I appear to be disagreeing with Hillary Clinton. I don't know if you heard it in the news this morning, but she said she's so tired of women who complain about, what was the word she used? It wasn't complain. Whine. Yes, thank you. Whine. What a word, yes. Women who whine about their situations that they need to change. And I just think, Hillary, whose job did you follow in your family for most of your life, you know? You had to make concessions because two of you could not both be president. Though we may see that in our future, and I hope so. But I think it's not that individual women have to stop saying anything and just suck it up, but that instead, women and men need to see that the way work is structured, the time matrices around work, make it impossible for people to be a success at that and to do other things in their lives, not only family, but also recreation, civic engagement, religious work, whatever they want to do. The balance myth also ignores the adaptive strategies of people who, and therefore perpetuates gender inequality. For example, in most families, including Hillary Clinton's, one job is prioritized. Because if you're going to have to move, you rarely are going to find opportunities for both to move up in a job. So if you have to move for a job, you change. The man's career is almost always traditionally prioritized. That is less so today. But it's very hard in one family to pursue two high demanding careers. The other thing that happens is because women couldn't change the career mystique of lockstep, continuous full-time work, and families couldn't do that, men and women have opted to reduce the family side of the work-family equation. That's all they have control of. So they reduce the number of kids they have or don't have kids, have them later in life, marry later in life, or don't marry. It's like we've managed that balance thing by getting rid of the family side as much as we could. It ignores the fact that people are caring for ailing parents and that they are, when the job becomes impossible, they're retiring, changing jobs, working part-time, starting a new business. So there's things that people do to try to manage the multiple balls that they have in the air. And this, I don't know how to work this little, we won't even work it. We'll just pretend that I'm doing it. Okay, so the yellow line is Canada. That's the percent of people working part-time by gender. And you see that about 30% of Canadian women work part-time. The United States, it's about 18% of women work part-time. So one strategy that Canadian women have used to manage all their multiple obligations is to work part-time. The contemporary workforce, we keep talking about this, but nobody's, not enough in work conferences around work and employment and labor markets, that the contemporary workforce is aging in Canada as in the United States and in and in the European countries. It increasingly consists of boomers, the boomer cohort. Boomers who men whose partners are in the labor force, so they don't have backup. Boomer women with partners in the labor force who don't have backup. Boomers, single and divorced women and men, but especially women are more apt to be single or divorced in this life stage. And boomers caring for aging relatives. So this is the workforce that we need to talk about. And I was talking to someone, and he was saying in his own life he's looking for new ways of doing things, but that when he's hiring somebody and his job, he's always looking for that young entry-level employee. And we have to recognize that the composition of the workforce and the composition of the labor pool is changing. Moreover, there's converging stresses at work for people in all life stages, singles, marrieds, older parents who wait to have their kids or whose kids come home, caregivers, those 50 plus, everyone is experiencing more time demands, and because of the nature of the economy and the right sizing of the workforce, there are fewer workers to do that same amount of work. Your job just got multiplied, right? Okay. Yesterday. Last week, okay. You, you can't see this slide. I know it's not related to aging families, but we'll pretend that's a grandchild. I love this slide. You can't see it, but it's a kitchen sink, two sides of it. In one, they have a little baby washing the baby, and the other one, they're washing the dishes. And it says, what are you doing to save time? So ask yourselves, what are you doing to save time? And I imagine how many of you here feel that time strain at work, because the technology and a global economy means that we're working a lot more and more demanding, even if we're not working more hours. So what research tells us about the work-time mismatch is that couples, men and women, all, whether you're single or married, work more hours than they prefer. And most say they work the hours they do because their jobs require it. Increasingly time-pressed workers and families and older workers want options or flexibilities, but they're told over and over when I interview them, they're told by their employer, you continue this long-hour job you have, or you leave. Those are your two choices. Second is the career retirement mismatch. I know I shouldn't do so many asides. So retirement is now a blurred transition. Mandatory retirement in the U.S. and I imagine mostly in Canada is illegal. People are retiring at all ages, and the decision is with the employee, not the employer, and they're unretiring in the form of bridge jobs, phased retirement, second careers. So we see what's happening in Canada that's happening in the U.S. and in Europe is the employment rate for those Canadians 55 and over has reversed in the mid-1990s, and we see it going back up to 2010 and still continuing. This is Canadians 55 and over that are working. I have another slide I won't show for men and women, and it's lower for women, but the same trend. This shows that the employed 50-year-old man in Canada expects to work about 16 years before retiring, and women almost as long. That's that solid line. The dotted line is when people the age at which they actually retire. And so you see there's this big gap from what people expect to do and what people are actually doing. Couple this with what I said about retirement being delayed, we see that there's something very different happening, that retirement is no longer synonymous with non-employment. And it's very, very confusing, so that people say, I'm unretired, I'm not retired, I'm semi-retired, and don't quite have, the identity isn't as clear as it used to be. This also has to do with planning. I couldn't find this Canadian statistics on this, so this is data from my own research about how much do you engage in planning. When you ask somebody how much planning they do, they mostly think financial planning, and that sort of means, do I have a retirement savings account? And so yes, men are more likely to say they do financial planning than women. The pink is unfortunately women. Lifestyle planning, nobody does any lifestyle planning. And those who do, it's more men than women again. Because retirement is traditionally a male transition. If you think about your mothers or your grandmothers, they really didn't have jobs to retire from. They were more in and out of the workforce. So they don't do less planning. But I really feel this is like my former students who talk about the wedding, you know, the wedding dress, the wedding flowers, the wedding color scheme, the wedding food, the wedding music. But they don't talk about marriage. So thank you. When I say, have you talked about how many kids you plan to have or how you're going to manage work and family? Well, no, you know, but they know everything about the day. And that's how we think about retirement. When am I going to retire? but not the 20 or 30 years I'm living in retirement. And that's the lifestyle planning, and that's what we've got to get more of. I also want to talk in this area of the career retirement mismatch, the idea of coupled careers. Most models that sociologists and economists and gerontologists do of retirement exits assume the individual as decision maker, and that's simply not the case if you're married. You have to plan both family side and work side all through the life course with certain consequences for later in life. And after doing my study, we interviewed both husbands and wives separately at different times, and I wondered, did they ever even talk to one another about retirement plans? Because they universally said, we want to retire together. But when I asked when they were going to retire, and then compared the ages that each one said and their own age difference, I found that 49% of the cases, the men said they were going to retire earlier than the wife was, even though they're going to retire together. And in 34% of the cases, she plans to retire before him, and 17% they were within a year of the time they said. So I'm not entirely sure they even talk. And you think about that. Think about how many conversations you've had with your significant others about retirement. Caregiving is a very gendered, takes on a very gendered aspect in that not only are women more likely to caregive, but if you're caregiving for your husband, you're 5 times more likely to leave the workforce to care for an ailing husband. The husbands caring for their wives, they're 50% less likely to retire if their wives are sick. They hire someone. They don't just quit work. So that becomes a real watershed, and people leaving the workforce earlier than they expected. This is the Statistics Canada General Social Survey. I'm just going to talk about things on the right side there, that when both partners are working, women rate their marriages 29.2 out of a possible 35, as do men, 29.5. When both are retired, they appear to be somewhat happier. My research shows that the first 2 years, they're not as happy. There's more conflict because they're trying to figure out, if you think about that time matrix we talked about, you have scheduled your life around weekdays and weekends and leaving the house and coming back, and suddenly you're there to face each other for the next 30 years. So that was it's always a little bit of a shock. In my research, the least happy were the women who were working whose husbands were retired, because and they thought their husbands should do more at home. Their husbands said, I'm doing lots at home, but it just... My husband is retired and I'm still working, I just want to say. So are couples in sync? My research shows that both lifestyle and financial planning is positively correlated somewhat with husband and wife, but the women plan less. Men are not influenced by their wife's plans. Women accommodate to their husband's plans, anticipating delaying or speeding up their own retirement to match his, and single women are less apt to plan. When I took my job at Cornell University, I had 2 young children. I was a widow at age 32, and I remember they said, do you want this, that, all these different kinds of retirement plans, and I said, I want the most money I can have right now. And unfortunately, that's how we think. We don't think about the future oftentimes. So what research shows about the career retirement mismatch is that older women, as a result of decisions throughout the life course, like having children, scaling back when you have children, prioritizing one person's career, women end up with lower status and fewer resources later in life. And it's predictable if you look all at the decisions along the way. Because of this time matrix, which expects people and rewards people who work continuously and full time. More family diversity. People downsize or delay family demands. The women who succeed are less likely to have children or be married. And parenthood is delayed, more singles, more divorce. It's easier to get off the career train, whether retiring or scaling back. It's hard to get back on or start a new career, given the time matrix that we have that assumes that at a certain age you're leaving the workforce or that you should have stayed on that career track, not leave it. The third mismatch is the risk-safety net mismatch, individual experience of change and expectations for the future. The changing life chronology, this moving platform of change that we're all living on, is increasing uncertainty and risk. Companies are engaged in what they call flexibilization. They want to have an easier way of firing people and hiring people, which gets rid of a lot of the protections that have been there in the past. And changing economies, changing technologies, as well as government and organizational policies and practices that affect when you enter and when you leave, as well as the timing and incentives to do so. That we know that there's always been a certain set of people who have high risk, and these are people usually with less education, minorities, immigrants, who are often in and out of the workforce, have no seniority, no security, and in the U.S., no benefits or pensions. But also individuals who are doing well can experience greater risk because their resources decline or because the claims or needs on their time go up. I'd just like to ask, how many people in this room have had to or are caring for an older relative? Yeah, me too. And I mean, and my mother, they would not, she was in Atlanta, Georgia, I was in Cornell, they would not let her leave the hospital unless it was in my care. And I'm teaching a class of 450 people. And you sort of have to figure that out. So what we see, and this was a study in the U.S., it was in 2005. The boomers here were in their 50s. The boomers are the gold-colored group. The matures, who are older than the boomers, are purple, and the Gen Xers are light blue. What we see is a lot of change in the last 5 years. For the matures and boomers, the Gen Xers are more likely to change jobs or have a financial status change. But then there's retired. The matures are more likely to retire. The boomers are more likely to have some experience in every category. This is personal things, the death of a close relative or friend. The 50% of boomers said that they experienced that in the last 5 years. They become grandparents, they have major life-threatening illness, had the last child leave home, and the bottom one down there became a caregiver, and the bottom one has had a child return home. So we always talk, life course scholars talk about all the changes in the life course occur in those first 20 years or 30 years in the early life course. What our research is increasingly showing is if you look at the number of life events in the past 5 years, it's in the 50s that people have lots of different changes. So on average, four changes in the last 5 years if you're in your 50s. 50-somethings, life changes and their concerns about the future. If you had 5 or more changes, you're in the turquoise color. And those who had a lot of changes feel tired, don't have enough energy, are uncertain about what the future holds, worry about the future, feel overwhelmed by their responsibilities, spend less time with their family than they want to. So it's not just retirees and older people, it's older workers in their 50s that are concerned about the future. They're also concerned about the financial security. Those with 5 or more changes, 2/3 of them are concerned about their financial security. A third are concerned about job security, and as a result, their strategy is I plan to work as long as I can. They also have serious medical events, both chronic illness and acute illnesses as we age. And what does this mean? How do we feel? We know studies show the importance of feeling in control of your life. So this question asks, how much in control do you feel about your aging process? And the boomers, half of the boomers said they had some control, 25% had no control. So they feel less in control than either those younger or older than they are. The impact of health events, those who had a major health event were more likely to feel no control, whether it was a major health event or a chronic health condition. So what research shows about the risk-safety net mismatch? The privatization of care, together with this work time pressures and demands, less sleep, less community participation, and less free time. And the result is that it shapes women's choices along the life course. Older women are more apt to be out of the workforce, economically insecure, divorced, widowed, living alone. We also find that research shows the individualization of risk, that there's a sense of chronic uncertainty, mounting concerns about layoffs, pensions, retirement, decisions about working longer. Now I'm turning to avenues for change. If you ask people, this is by Peter Hart, who's a well-known survey research person in the U.S., about choosing a model for retirement, asking people what they want in retirement. 65% of older Americans, 50, I think it's 45 and older in his study, want to begin a new chapter in life by being active, starting new activities, setting new goals. 28% want to take it easy, take care of yourself, and enjoy your well-deserved rest. And then there's 6% who want some of both and 1% who want neither. So we see, I know. I was actually in a focus group with Peter Hart once and watching what some people say. Like there's, in the U.S., I hope you're watching some of our crazy election. But there's always this group, these undecided, and, they keep asking them, what would you need to know and how do you feel and all this stuff. And, you're giving all this power to these 5 people who say they're undecided. So what boomers want is more flexibility, more control, and options to shift down, not drop out. Many of them want that. They want some to stay in their career jobs, to continue career development, including being trained for new technologies. Some want second, third, or fourth careers. Some want schooling, sabbaticals, and other timeouts. They want to learn a new job. And they also want to have time for their care work, to take care of their health, their passions, and their civic engagement. So how can policies, practices, and scholars promote a changing time matrix? What we need to do is reframe the expected durations of and greater employee control over work days, work weeks, work years. I'm involved in a large study in the U.S. of how we can create greater flexibility, greater control of employees of their time so they may stay in the workforce longer. We need to develop legitimated timeouts at work and time-ins for education for those at all life stages. We have this phrase in the U.S., I bet you have it too, lifetime education, or there's, yeah, lifelong learning. Thank you. That's the same as ours. I just forgot the title. Well, lifelong learning, we say it, but what is it? Where is it? Lifelong learning often means you can go back and take a pottery course, but Where is the courses on how to become a teacher, how to get certified later, to use your skills in something else, to work in the healthcare industry? Where are those ways of topping off your education for people at all ages? And we're going to need this because technology and the economy is just changing so rapidly that we need to have new skills. Also, what I find is people want to continue to work. They don't want to continue to work in their existing job. They want something else. They want something with meaning or purpose, or even just flexibility. Finally, we need to create more flexible career paths, possibilities for second, third, or fourth acts in volunteer service work, but also in employment for those adults of all ages, plus social insurance and skill upgrades for the risks and transitions inherent in a turbulent world labor market. So now is the time to rethink the time matrix, to reimagine, reconfigure, and research innovations. Where are the pockets of change in work hours and work weeks, and work design and reward structures, in the education, occupation, retirement, reemployment pathway, in responses to risks, in order to address the widening gaps between the aging time matrix and an older labor force with care responsibilities as well as uncertainties of a global economy. And we need to do this reimagining, reconfiguring, and research in order to promote the effective functioning of boomers and their families. So even an aging grandmother can learn something about camels. I have to say, it was easy to get on. It was hard to get off. It took two of the men that were working with the camels to get me off. So embarrassing. And there are always plenty of reasons to say why we have to keep the status quo. But we really need to try to consider ways of changing what is and reimagining what could be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Moen, for that fabulous address. It was really interesting, and I am certain there are many questions from the floor. So there are mics over here. So those of you that have some questions, would you please line up, and we'll take your questions. Louise Plouffe.
Thank you very much. I'm Louise Plouffe, formerly with the Public Health Agency of Canada and about to begin another job elsewhere. Could you provide, Dr. Moen, could you provide us with some examples of innovations or innovations in some of those directions for change that you pointed out and how they might be working out, if you're aware of some?
Thank you, and good luck on your new job, your second career, or third. I think that the fact is, if it's innovations in the workplace around flexibility, it can't be geared to older workers. It has to be for everybody. And believe me, everybody is secretly happy about that because they don't want it. They want it for themselves, for raising children too. Here, let me see. So here is the Microsoft in the Netherlands, for example. They're creating more flexible work environments using technologies that bring people together where they are working in a traditional office environment, satellite offices, home offices, or remote locations. They're trying to attract and retain talent and improve productivity and work-life balance. And so what they're doing is really changing when and where you work. And that's the kind of thing that my research is looking at too. So it's for everyone that being at a job is not working. I can remember my first job at Orkin Exterminating Company. And I had no work. And I had to sit there and pretend I was working until 5 o'clock. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. So we've got to stop equating sitting there with working and use people to achieve outcomes and not time. So move away from the time matrix while still protecting workers so that they're not overworked, but also giving them greater control and flexibility over their time. And we're going to have to do that because there's not going to be a large cohort coming into the workforce. They're going to have to use older workers, their own, and they're going to have to hire others. That's one example.
Oh, I think we have another question.
Could I follow that with a challenge about the research and methodological risks? Your couples work is really very provocative about, as social scientists, whether we take individuals as the unit of analysis or how we can seriously consider linked lives in the way of your work. Could you help us in that research challenge, please?
I'm so glad you raised that, this idea of what is the unit of analysis that we study. And it's so much easier to study individuals because they sort of appear to be stable over time. Even though they may not be, we can go back and survey them. Whereas it's hard to survey family units because the family units change. But couples are the unit of decision-making for so many things, whether to enter into a continuing care facility, whether to have one person be cared for in a different way, whether to keep working, take a new job, etc. And I think what has happened is all the models of the 20th century, the early 20th century, were based on individuals. And if you remember, they all said, to make things clearer, I'm reducing my sample and I'm just focusing on white men. You know, all the articles said that because it was easier, because women didn't fit. Women don't have those jobs. And I think when you look at women's career paths, why Hillary Clinton moved to Washington, you cannot understand that if you just look at her education, her characteristics, the way we traditionally have modeled things. You have to look at the couple. Because she was a tide mover. She moved because her husband got a new job as president. And same with, yes, thank you, Michelle. I actually heard Michelle give a talk and before he was running for president, and she was talking about her job and her career path, and that just sort of all got put on the wayside. So we have to look at couples, and we have to ask both. The things that it's much easier to say, I wish I had longitudinal data, and I wish I had data on couples or the family, but I don't, and here it is, my study. It's really hard to actually get that. For example, our couples couldn't agree on how many children they had. So you can understand that maybe because there's his, hers, and theirs or something, and some get counted or not. But we decided to focus on what the wife said about the kids, how many kids they had. So many things that looking at couples helps you to see one is satisfied, one isn't. And then what does that mean for their choices? Or that, one says they share the housework equally, and one says that they do 90% of the housework. I mean, the discrepancies as well as the congruence in couples are new information that you can't get when you interview just a single respondent in a survey. However, like the PSID, and maybe you have Canadian studies that do this, that where they had one respondent, it was the head of the household, and typically it was he would answer what his wife thought. So that we see that isn't a good way of doing it. You need two respondents, and you need to really talk about the decision making, how it happens, because it's not an individual decision, and it's even though people tend to treat it that way. I'm glad you brought it up. I'd also like to say we need more qualitative analysis to talk about with people why they moved, instead of entering into the regression analysis of all the things that could cause them to move into a continuing care community and not ask them why they moved into the continuing care community, because that's another source of data. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Deborah Sheets. I'm sure you've probably read that article by Anne-Marie Slaughter in The Atlantic about why women can't have it all.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it was an interesting article because it pointed out that even when women follow their careers and have what they think is their dream job, that often they realize that they have other values that take them back to another position. And so I thought that was an interesting article and just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Women make decisions very differently than men when it comes to family.
Yes, they don't always make the decision, the career, logical career decision that would make sense. If those of you who haven't, don't know about this, Anne-Marie Slaughter was the, what was her position?
She was the first woman director of public policy planning at the State Department.
Okay, Director of Public Policy Planning at the State Department. Her boss was Hillary Clinton. And she left that job and went back to her job as a professor, which she could do while raising her teenage boys because she realized she wasn't home enough to see the teenage boys. And this is what I mean about the private troubles of balance, that I really think it's not that. We have to have jobs where for a time maybe you can reduce the amount of work. Maybe you hire 2 people who have different parts of that job, but we have to have more flexibility. I want to go back to this, and everybody will say, no, you have to have somebody who works 24 hours a day in that job. But we could reconfigure jobs, take some of it and put it somewhere else, or get rid of low-value work. I guarantee, having spent some years at the National Science Foundation in Washington, that there's lots of meetings that people don't need to have. I could say that even of universities. So how do we rearrange and structure jobs to have timeouts or reduced work time in ways that men and women can configure and make their lives more reasonable and realistic? There's somebody who talks about, we could think of 10-hour units. So for the next year, I want to work 3 of those 10-hour units, or 2. But then maybe sometimes I want to go to 4.5 of these units, but not get away from this time matrix of the way work is organized now. We could rethink it, or rethink it in terms of getting this job done or that contract completed.
I don't think I'm going to be able to let you ever sit down.
Good morning. There's also such a thing as role reversal.
Yes.
I know of a couple who the wife is a nurse and the husband was trying to get into Revenue Canada, and you have to have training and stuff like that. So they decided that the man will stay at home and the woman, the nurse, did her work. The thing is, sometimes because the woman is the nurturer and the mother, and the husband kind of trusts the woman that you can take care of the children, darling, talk to your children. And the husband, as a father, loses his role. And when he stays home in the role reversal episode, he was able to be the father of his children. And fatherhood is very important. If we lose that, it's a very, and just one thought, behind every successful man is a woman holding the ladder.
I agree with that, the idea of role reversal and how it changes, and a lot of it changes. I think it's not just women who want flexibility. That's what I love about the next generation of the workforce, the Gen Xers and the millennials. They say, One guy told me, my idea of hell is working in the same job continuously the rest of my life. You know, they don't believe in that career mystique anymore because they have seen how it hasn't come to fruition for so many people. They want a life. And I think the fathers want to raise their children as well as the mothers. But as jobs are structured, you have to have one good job. Oh, let me just tell you, when I talk to my students, I can't get over this, undergraduates, at Cornell, they want it, not at Minnesota, but I'm going to talk about it at Cornell. They want to be CEOs. They want to be the head of a law firm, a partner in a law firm. I mean, they have high aspirations because their families have given them these high aspirations. Are you going to have children, I ask? Yes, 3. And I say, wonderful. How are you going to do it? My husband and I are both going to work part-time. And I think, I mean, this isn't just one person. This is many of them. They want equality, so they'll both work part-time. Jobs don't come that way, you know? I just think, where have you been? You know? Jobs don't come that way at all. And why don't they? Why isn't it possible that we have jobs that you can work both part-time and earn enough and have the benefits you need to raise a child for that period of time? And maybe when you're leaving the workforce that you want to do that. So we need to think of more flexibility. The reversed roles also comes a lot in around retirement, when the husband retires and the wife doesn't. And I'm living that right now. It's working very well, thank you. But I wouldn't let my husband retire. Talk about couple decision making. I keep saying, what are you going to do? He doesn't play golf. He doesn't play bridge. You know, I could see him there waiting for me to come home. And so he started volunteering and teaching reading to grade school kids in a downtown district school, and he just loves that. And then he has a place to go, and we're all happy. So, but there is this reversal, and it is unusual. So people, but that's happening more and more. They're choosing one job, and sometimes the better job is the job of the wife. But why should you have to prioritize one job? Why can't you manage to have 2? Why can't companies think of when they're moving one person across the country or into another, overseas to Europe, that they're really moving a family, and how can they manage that? Should I just stay here and take another question if there is?
We're going to have to wrap up.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to again thank Dr. Moen for showing us that lifelong learning is fun and also funny. So I think we all enjoyed that. Thank you so much.